Direct Connection is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you. Live from Maryland Public Television, this is Direct Connection with Jeff Salkin.
Good evening and welcome to your Direct Connection. This is the last night of the 2021 session of the Maryland General Assembly. Both chambers are meeting into this evening. Earlier in the session, lawmakers have passed police reforms. Tonight, they are closing in on a deal on sports betting. Coming up in our program, two county executives will join us to talk about what it all means in your communities. First tonight, we had a chance to talk about the session today with Governor Hogan.
Overall, it was a very successful session. I would say our most successful of the 7 years that I've been in office. You know, the most important stuff really got done in a bipartisan way. While that doesn't usually seem to happen in Washington down the road, here the most important bill of the session was the Relief Act of 2021, where we enacted nearly unanimously. We had one Republican in the House, but voted against it. But everyone else voted in favor of our bill, which was the largest tax cut in Maryland history, $1.45 billion, to help hundreds of thousands of struggling Marylanders, small businesses, and nonprofits to help us make it through this pandemic. We had a tremendous bipartisan cooperation on the budget, which was also historic. That utilized and spent all of the federal dollars that came in. Almost no disagreement on that. We came together on a lot of major things, but we didn't agree on everything, but we had record funding for K through 12 schools for the 7th year in a row, a balanced and responsible budget, record funding for school choice, and record investments in broadband, workforce training, and we continued strong leadership at the Maryland Department of Health, where we nearly unanimously confirmed Dennis Schrader, who's done a fantastic job as health secretary throughout the COVID crisis.
The package of police bills has been seen by many as the top issue of the session. It certainly dominated the last few days. Overall, in your view, does it make Marylanders more safe or less safe?
Well, that's a tough question. But first of all, we shared the ideal of finding some sensible police reforms. There were about 9 bills in the Senate, 6 or 7 of which we probably would have been ready to sign into law. We did let 2 of the bills that finally passed go in, but 3 of them, while they had some good things that we supported, like body cams and a number of other initiatives, they have some measures that are downright scary, and I think actually are probably going to have to be rewritten. We're going to have to come back and strike a balance, because I think they put both police officers and the public at risk. And so that's why I vetoed them. Obviously, the Democrats have 70% majorities in both houses and have the ability to override every bill. But these 3 that they chose to override, I think they'll probably be amended by the next session.
There was also an override on the juvenile justice bill, which would take away the possibility of a life without parole sentence for somebody who commits a crime under the age of 18. You vetoed that. It was overwritten. You knew it would be overridden. I guess my question is, how do you decide when you're going to, and you split this with the police bills, when you're going to get out the veto pen and when you're going to let something take effect without your signature, when you know the end impact is going to be the same either way?
Well, it depends on how egregious the bill is and how terrible it is. So if it's something that I don't necessarily 100% support, but I don't think it's going to do grave damage to the state, then I'll say I'm not going to put my name on this bill because I don't happen to agree with everything, but I'm going to let it go into law because I realize that the majority rules, they have a super majority, and I'm going to let it go into law. But if it's something so egregious that I think we need to have that fight on, I'm going to stand up and let people know that this is something bad that we're going to have to come back and change. On the parole juvenile lifers bill, look, I was the first governor in 24 years to actually parole people that fall into this category. We take it very seriously. I've paroled and commuted the sentence and pardoned more people than the past 4 or 5 governors added together. But to just these are the most egregious of criminals, violent murderers who we're saying are just going to be released from prison, I just happen to just disagree.
Coronavirus, COVID-19, of course, has dominated the last year, a little bit more than that. The number of Marylanders in the hospital with the coronavirus hit a low point exactly 1 month ago today, 765, I think. It's up nearly 500 people since then, which frankly, I don't totally understand because so many people now have had at least one shot of one of the vaccines and ought to have some immunity. Obviously, there are the variants. Are you surprised we're seeing the number of people in the hospital increase at this point?
Well, actually, our numbers are way down today in almost every category. So they do fluctuate. But today, hospitalizations are down, our medical surge beds are down, and ICUs are down. All the totals are down. Our case numbers are down around 900 from a high of 3,600. And so they fluctuate. We're right around 5% on our 7-day positivity rate. Places like New York and Michigan and other places are 400% higher than that. So we think we're still trending in the right direction, but we're very concerned about these dangerous variants that are much more transmissible, and it's why we're working so hard. We've now vaccinated 3.5 million people, and we're making progress every single day. Almost 80% of all the people over 65 have already received the vaccine, and we're approaching in the next few days 50% of the entire population over 18 will have received the vaccine.
So hopefully, the tide turns at some point in terms of the number of people in the hospital. And I always use that.
We added 6,000 hospital beds, surge capacity, so that our main goal was to stop deaths and our hospitals from overflowing. They're nowhere near overflowing, and when you have 1,200 people in there, we still have thousands of beds available. We don't ever want to get to the point where they're filled up, but we're not in the place where we were in the spring, where we actually had overloaded hospitals and no place to put them, and we had to build surge hospital beds and open up old hospitals and build new ones.
You mentioned your new health secretary, who has been confirmed by the Senate. He was on our program last week talking about how to get vaccines. There's still people having trouble. We had a caller, gentleman, said he was 65, a heart condition, hadn't been able to get an appointment. And we were able to give him the toll-free phone number. What's your advice for Marylanders who, for whatever reason, they haven't done it yet, they want to do it now? What's the best way to get a shot?
Well, there are many different ways, and I want to encourage every single person, anyone over 16, actually, to go get a shot. And you can get them any number of ways. We're opening 2 more mass vac sites this week, 2 more next week. So we'll have 13 mass vaccination centers. We've scheduled 650,000 people that way on our state website, but we also have 3,000 points of distribution where almost any pharmacy in the state, many doctors' offices, local health departments, there are 3,000 different places you can get a vaccine. The supply is increasing. As I said, we're now vaccinating people at one of the fastest rates in the country. We're in the top 10 in almost every category. So no one should still be saying that they can't figure out how to get one. They may not immediately get it today because the supply is coming in every week. But you should be able to get one scheduled in the next week or so.
Governor, we just have a couple of minutes. I wanted to ask, last Friday, you created a work group on anti-Asian American violence. And you mentioned that you've seen this within your family. Why do you think this is a worsening situation? What's happening in society that this has become the problem that it has?
Well, I think, the society, we're becoming more divisive, and there's more anger and frustration out there, all across many different sectors. But this Asian hatred and discrimination seems to have really been exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis and some of the rhetoric. And I think, people just taking things out on people that don't look the same as they do and blaming them for the fact that this terrible virus that has killed millions of people happened to originate in Wuhan, China. And anyone who's Asian, whether they're from China or not, and didn't have anything to do with it, is somehow being targeted as a result. But it really is bad. I mean, we've had multiple businesses in Howard County attacked on Lunar New Year. We have people being screamed at, and there's real serious violence taking place all across the country with Asians being attacked, and we've got to put an end to it.
You hear that in this community in particular, there is sometimes a reluctance to come forward to report damage to a business, attack on an individual. What would you want Asian Americans, Marylanders, all Marylanders to know about why they should come forward and how best to do it?
Well, it's true. There's always a reluctance they don't sometimes feel that anything's going to happen, and they may be afraid to come forward. And so we set up a hotline that we encourage people to contact their local police or to contact the state hotline. We're also formed, as you mentioned, this task force that's going to be headed up by former U.S. Attorney Robert Hur, who's of Korean American descent. And he's going to put together a group to really work on this. And one of the things we want to do is work with the community to make sure that these crimes don't go unreported and that we can actually do something about investigating and prosecuting these crimes to the fullest extent of the law.
Our thanks to the governor. Joining us now to take your calls are the county executives of both of Maryland's H counties. Calvin Ball is the Howard County executive. Barry Glassman is the Harford County executive. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Gentlemen, lots to talk about, and feel free to jump in at any point. But I thought we would start with what was the biggest issue of the legislative session, the police reform bills, and ask just what it's going to mean for both of your counties. And I'll start with Mr. Ball.
So in Howard County, we are already moving forward with full implementation of a body-worn camera program. I already announced that in my upcoming budget, we're going to allocate about $3.2 million. And I think the crux of the police reform conversation is that people should not only be safe in our communities, but they should feel safe. And there should be a level of transparency. And so I think coming together with our law enforcement and first responders, along with our community, and having these critical conversations will help all of us have a better, safer environment.
Mr. Glassman in Harford County.
So in Harford County, and Jeff, the interesting thing too, and I always point this out, I guess, being a former president of MACO, we have different types of law enforcement in Maryland. We have some elected sheriffs, as in Harford County. I've got an elected sheriff who is responsible for all law enforcement. His employees are actually state employees for the most part as sworn officers. My good friend Calvin has a Department of Police. Some of the larger metropolitan counties, of course, have their own police department, and he appoints a police chief and staff and so forth. So I always caution folks when you look at bills that the state is a big state and we all don't fit into the same pocket really exactly. So I joined County Executive Ball and just rolled out a budget today, and we are going to fully implement the body-worn camera program also here in Harford County ahead of the state mandate. I would say for the most part, the camera program, I think, is protective not only of the community, but of the law enforcement officers so that they can work together in protecting not only the community, but also making sure law enforcement officers are protected while they're out doing their job also. I would say, as many of the things that Annapolis does to us, there is a cost. County Executive Ball mentioned Howard County and Harford County, and we're one of the smaller counties in the Big Eight. It's going to cost approximately $1.5 million per year, which not only includes equipment, but additional personnel. The state's attorney has to hire personnel to review every tape, every piece of evidence, and store it in the cloud. And there's even an infrastructure cost for for maintaining these records. So that is going to be one of the fiscal things that I think a lot of counties, we're fortunate to be in a position to fund that. I would say more rural counties, smaller municipal departments may have some difficulty with those costs. But
let me ask if do either of you have any doubts that money is well spent? I mean, you think about the the daylight, being the best disinfectant. I forget which justice said that, but those cameras and everybody's cell phone cameras seem to really change policing.
Yeah, I think, as I said, I think it works both ways. It protects the environment, the community, and law enforcement officers. So, but Jeff, we spend a lot of money for good causes in local government, and the trick is finding that funding and being responsible for it. So that's going to cost additional funds. We're still going through some of the other bills, which I think will have some effect on retention, recruitment of officers, hiring additional supervisors to respond to certain incidents. So I think the reforms are so broad, and as the governor mentioned, I think in classic Annapolis fashion, to some extent, probably too broad and too much all at once. But it will take us some time to sort through it, and it may take 5 years before we really see the cultural impact on the state through this package. And some of it will be good, and I think later on we'll find that there are some areas that it hasn't worked as well. And so we'll have to keep an eye on that and follow it and see what the long-term impact is, whether it has helped with crime, whether it hasn't, and to what degree it has protected not only our community, but also worked to protect citizens.
Lots of other issues we want to get to, but I'll give Mr. Ball another chance to talk about this. And I'm curious, we heard the governor raise the concern about being able to recruit officers in the future. We heard Mr. Glassman bring that up as well. In Howard County, any concerns? You hearing anything from your officers along those lines?
These are challenging times for police officers to not only ensure that the public is safe, but address many of these issues and concerns. And that's one of the reasons why in 2015, as a then council member, I put in legislation to evaluate the use of technology such as body-worn cameras. And so we've been having this conversation in Howard for quite some time. And I think ensuring that our police officers not only understand the expectations of them, but they have the support, not just through things such as body cameras, but just thinking about things such as mental health and ensuring that they're compensated fairly so that they minimize some of the stress and are able to actually de-escalate situations when they're in them.
Let me remind our viewers, if you have a question for our guests, you can give us a call. We'll have the number up on the screen. You can also email a question to livequestions@mpt.org. Let's talk about COVID in your two counties. What's happening there in terms of vaccine rollout and school reopening?
So in Howard County, right now we have about 28% of our community is fully vaccinated. We have about 42% who have their first shot. And we're very proud that we're now at about 97% of our super seniors, or those 75 and plus who are vaccinated. We early on worked with our school system to start prioritizing our educators because we all want our teachers and our kids back into school buildings as soon as safely as possible. And we think that vaccination was a component of that. We're going to continue working, not just through hybrid learning, but trying to get our kids back into the classroom as soon as possible when there's as safe an environment as possible. So that's PPE, that's vaccination, that's looking at filters, that's testing, which unfortunately has fallen off in some jurisdictions to about half of what it was at our height. These are all of the measures that we have to put in place to ensure a safe teaching and learning environment.
Mr. Ball, just curious, what percentage of school kids there, and I know you don't run the school system, but what percentage of kids are in the classroom and how many days a week?
So we just had another tranche of kids go back today, and they're starting to slowly come back. A lot of it, frankly, began with some hesitancy, whether it's vaccine hesitancy. And as we're seeing more people become confident, we're seeing more parents interested in going back into the classroom. They're still at 1 or 2 days, depending upon whether or not they have an IEP, they have a student with a disability or what have you. But I think that we're going to continue ramping that up. One of the things that we worked on most recently with the school system was just ensuring that we had enough capacity online for our students to be able to do the online and the hybrid and then the face-to-face model. And so we're very pleased that we were able to do that in a collaborative way.
Mr. Glassman, what's that look like in Harford County?
So we're at about the state average on folks that have been vaccinated. We're just getting up around 1/3, about 33%. And I believe about 21% of our citizens have had both shots. So we're keeping up with the state averages, trying to get and push our vaccines out as quickly as possible. The FEMA outreach teams have made their way to the county last week, in addition to expanding local health department clinics. And then next week, by the 19th, we hope to have the larger Ripken Stadium mass vac site up and running, where we're going to try to push through about 3,000 folks per day at that site. So we're on target with pushing out our vaccines and our messaging. Our teachers, staffs, county employees, folks that wanted to get their vaccine, we started early in February, early March. So anyone in the school system, county employees, and so forth have been vaccinated that want to be vaccinated. The Board of Ed started phasing in return of school back on March 1st, a couple of days a week. This week, we have both elementary and secondary young people back at 4 days a week with a virtual day on Friday. So we are trying to get back to normal. Of course, as Calvin said, some parents are still reticent, so we still have some students doing all virtual, but folks that want to get back to school, we have the ability to get back 4 days a week. And so as we begin to open our businesses a little bit more, we are one of the counties, I would say, that we never came down too much below that 5% positivity rate after the holidays. And we've been bumping down around 8 to 9% the last few days. So we're continuing to watch our numbers also as, these variants begin to work, not only in Harford County, but we see some increases in other areas. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. And I do think these numbers are going to go up and down, ebb and flow until we get more folks vaccinated. And I don't want to be pessimistic, but I do think that this is going to be around to some extent, maybe for a couple of years, as we really move beyond the pandemic and get the herd immunity out there. So,
gentlemen, I'm down to a couple minutes here, so forgive the interruption. I have a great email question I want to get to and give you both a quick chance to respond. The writer says, has there been any discussion of diverting law enforcement duties and dollars to social services and conflict resolution? And I'll ask Mr. Glassman to just give me a couple of sentences on that.
Well, we have spent the last 6 years here trying to really bring our pay scales up to the regional level so that we can retain and keep our law enforcement officers. But the writer is correct. When you look at the number of civil disturbance, mental health calls that our law enforcement officers have to respond to, it is quite evident that we need to invest more in mental health, behavioral health throughout our state, and train officers to deal with this. I actually support the concept of training a different set of folks, response teams, crisis teams, to go out on these calls instead of tying up law enforcement and putting them in the middle of a marital dispute, a civil dispute, and handle it that way. So we need to invest more. In Harford County, we have a crisis center, and we've begun to try to address a lot of those needs before someone calls 911 and has to report or have law enforcement go out.
I'm down to about a minute. Let me ask Mr. Ball about that.
Yeah, it's not fair to the officer or the person in distress to ensure that the people who might not necessarily be trained for that to have to be working on mental health challenges. There should be enough training for any first responder to have to be there. However, we want to make sure that those who are trained, who are professional in dealing with mental health crisis, that's where we have our dollars and our resources so that they can really use their talents, and the person in distress in our whole community gets what they really need.
County Executives Calvin Ball and Barry Glassman, gentlemen, really appreciate the time. Thank you very much. That is Direct Connection for this week. We're back Friday with State Circle. We will have a wrap-up of the 2021 General Assembly and hear from the presiding officers. Join us Friday at 7. Now, for all of us at MPT, thanks for watching Direct Connection, and have a good night.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.